Actually, the groom slept with me, Yolanda said excitedly, as if she might shout yay after. The room exploded into chaos. I saw my parents sitting at a nearby table, looking like they were about to faint. Even with all the commotion around me, my mind suddenly felt calm. Barry slept with Yolanda? No way. That can't be true because he... My name is Melissa McCarthy. I'm a typical 28-year-old. I graduated from a decent college and now work in a clerical job at a big trading company. I'm not a failure, but I've always been average in everything. My grades were average, my sports abilities were average, and my social life was average. I didn't have any major problems, but there was nothing really special about me either. This didn't change as I got older. I try hard at work, but my performance is average, and my housekeeping skills are average too. Looking back, my childhood was pretty normal too. Typical middle class, with parents who had regular jobs. I went to college on a scholarship, and I'm still paying it back every month. I'm not unhappy about it, and I'm really grateful to my parents for raising me. Still, my whole life has been completely ordinary. My best friend, Yolanda Foster, has had a life totally different from mine. Yolanda and I work at the same company and became friends because we were the only two women in our department when we started. We went from just being close to becoming true friends because of her personality. Unlike me, Yolanda is cheerful and sociable. She never gets shy around people. She graduated from a prestigious university and was even a runner-up in a beauty contest. Her family is wealthy and they own a company, but she's not stuck up at all. She's confident and dates handsome guys from top companies. She's good at her job and always gets attention because of her charm. She's also considerate and proactive. She's different from me. Maybe I'm just jealous of Yolanda, even though I consider her my best friend. Thinking about how different we are always makes me feel uneasy. With a sigh, I press the enter key harder than necessary. After 5 years at the company, even though I'm not very efficient, I'm used to the work. So even when I'm lost in thought, my fingers keep typing on the keyboard. Then I feel a light tap on the back of my head. Hey Melissa, what's with the sigh? It didn't hurt, but feeling frustrated, I turned around in my chair, rubbing the back of my head. Yolanda was standing there with a rolled-up document in her hand. Yolanda, seriously, you haven't made any progress with your work. You're so inefficient. Lunch is in 30 minutes. Yolanda peeks at my desk and comments with a look of exasperation. I'm used to hearing this, but today it stings a bit. Wow, is it that late already? I need to hurry. I checked the clock in a panic and got back to work. I have to finish this by 3:00 p.m. Hey, where are we going for lunch? Oh, sorry, I don't have time for lunch today. What? You're behind on your work? Come on, let's go. The Italian place on Oak Street. Wait, but I really don't have time. Before I can finish, Yolanda is already gone, walking briskly out of the office, probably heading to the restroom. Her neatly curled chestnut hair sways behind her slim back. Several male employees stop working to watch her leave. She's so pushy. That's her spoiled side showing. I think to myself, feeling it's no wonder I complain. Yolanda's bad habit is not listening to others, but I know she means well. Maybe she's trying to cheer me up and take me out for a change of pace since I'm clearly struggling with my work. I pull myself together and focus on my work for the next 30 minutes until lunch break. Yolanda's favorite Italian restaurant is a 5-minute walk from the office. It's a stylish place with delicious food, quite different from the typical lunch spots for office ladies, fitting for someone like Yolanda. A $30 lunch, I would never come here alone. I really want a boyfriend. We're 28 already, right? It's about time to get married and leave the company. Oh, Melissa, you have a boyfriend, right? Despite her casual tone, she skillfully handles the knife and fork. I twirl some pasta around my fork, impressed by her upbringing showing through in moments like this. Yeah, I do, I reply, suddenly remembering something. Oh right, I'm getting married next month. As I continue in the same tone, Yolanda's smooth movements come to a sudden halt. What? Yolanda's surprised voice drowns out the elegant classical music playing in the background. Wait, I didn't know about that. When did this happen? Well, he just proposed last week, and I haven't had the chance to tell you yet, I explained. So, what kind of guy is your boyfriend? I don't think I've ever heard about him before, Yolanda asked, glaring at me with her eyes framed by thick lashes. Even though she says she hasn't heard about him, it's because she never listened to my stories before. I'm used to this by now, so I brush off my irritation with a sigh and start telling her about my boyfriend. He graduated from the best university in the country and works at a top company. We've been dating for 2 years since we met at work, and it's been a calm and steady relationship. Being with him makes me feel secure, and most importantly, I can be myself around him. But as I got closer to turning 30, I started to worry about whether we would keep dating forever or get married. Then, just as I was thinking about it, he proposed. So, Yolanda, I was wondering if you could give a speech at the wedding. Would you? I asked, telling Yolanda something I'd been thinking about since the proposal. She seemed a bit hesitant, but she agreed. Knowing Yolanda, she might not be thrilled that her best friend is getting married before her. But as I naively thought this, I didn't notice the tense look on Yolanda's face. On the wedding day, Yolanda came to the waiting room before the ceremony started. Congratulations, Melissa. She walked in with a smile, looking so beautiful she could outshine the bride. Since my groom, Barry, was there, I thought it was a good time to introduce them. Thank you, Yolanda. This is my husband, Barry. Barry, this is my best friend, Yolanda. Nice to meet you. I'm Barry Klein. Melissa has told me a lot about you. Thank you for coming today, Barry said, smiling warmly at Yolanda and nodding his head. Nice to meet you. I'm Yolanda Foster. Melissa, when did you catch such a handsome guy? She said in her usual tone, smiling back at Barry. I expected her to hang around and chat, but she left the room quickly. I felt uneasy about how she was acting. What's going on? Yolanda has been acting distant since I told her about the wedding. As I stared at the door Yolanda left through, lost in thought, Barry murmured, "What's up with her?" Huh. I looked up and saw him with a puzzled expression, his hand on his chin like he was thinking deeply. When I asked what was wrong, he said he also felt something was off with Yolanda. When she saw my face, she looked surprised for a moment. Have we met somewhere before? Even as he said that, he didn't seem to remember anything. Yolanda is a striking beauty, so it's unlikely he's confusing her with someone else. Though we both felt something was off, we couldn't find an answer, and the wedding reception began. The large venue was filled with round tables, and everyone, both familiar and unfamiliar, wore smiles. As I looked around the room from the head table, the reality of getting married slowly sank in. I had always thought I'd never get married, and I'd live an ordinary life, with ordinary day-to-day existence. I didn't know if not getting married was normal or not, but I had always imagined I'd live alone until I met Barry. The reception was going smoothly, and it was time for the friend's speech. I anxiously looked at Yolanda. She stood up gracefully and walked towards us, her heels clicking on the floor. Wow, she's gorgeous. Is she a celebrity? Among the whispers I heard, I felt proud of the compliments Yolanda was getting, instead of feeling inferior like I usually do. Today, I looked up at Yolanda as she stood at the microphone, feeling unusually calm. She looked even more beautiful than usual today. I hope she finds a good guy soon, though it might be hard for her to choose because she's so picky. As I was thinking that, she suddenly looked at me with a mischievous glint in her eye. Melissa, congratulations. I was debating whether to say this, but I don't want to hide anything from my best friend. I don't want it to come out after the wedding and cause trouble, so I'll say it now. With that introduction, Yolanda smiled brightly. The room started to buzz. My calm heart was suddenly thrown into chaos. What is she going to say? When I turned to look at Barry, he looked just as confused. Barry glanced at me as if he had no idea what was happening. In hindsight, I should have stopped Yolanda then. Actually, the groom slept with me. Yolanda said it with so much excitement that it sounded like she might say, "Yay." Afterward, the room went into chaos. I saw my parents at a nearby table looking like they were about to faint. Despite all the chaos around me, my mind became calm. Barry slept with Yolanda? No way. That can't be true because, hey. Yolanda, what are you talking about? I asked. Sorry, you know I can't keep secrets. It's exactly what I said. We slept together, Yolanda replied. That's impossible, I said. Yolanda's beautiful face twisted into a mocking smile, and it was no longer beautiful at all. It's impossible because my husband, I'm gay, Barry said at the same time I did. The microphone picked up Yolanda's shocked voice. The room was in an uproar, and it was hard to tell who was saying what. Yolanda stood there stunned. The speech was no longer the focus. At that moment, the door swung open with a bang, and a man burst in. Barry, sorry I'm late. The man at the entrance looked exactly like the groom. Yolanda looked back and forth between the man and Barry, speechless. Glad I made it, but what's with the mood here? The man asked. The man walked toward us, puzzled by the atmosphere. As he approached, he noticed Yolanda and called out, "Hey, long time no see. What are you doing here?" He raised his hand and greeted Yolanda casually. Wait a minute. 2 Barrys? What's going on? Yolanda, who had been so confident moments ago, now sat down weakly, finally understanding the situation. I got up and walked over to Yolanda. Actually, Fred and my husband Barry are identical twins. At first glance, they look like the same person, but if you look closely, you can see their different personalities in their eyes. Barry, the older brother, has gentle eyes, while his younger brother, Fred, has a mischievous look. But unless you're close to them, it's hard to tell them apart. Unlike his brother, Fred graduated from high school and has been working part-time since. He's sociable and good at interviews, but he keeps quitting jobs and looking for new ones. Fred also has a complicated relationship with women. He often pretends to be his brother and dates multiple women, causing trouble for Barry. However, because Fred is likable and Barry is forgiving, they have a good relationship. Yolanda. I gently placed my hand on Yolanda's shoulder as she sat on the floor dejected. Yolanda had made a shocking confession at my wedding. In the end, it was a misunderstanding, and she ended up embarrassing herself, but she tried to ruin my happiness. However, I didn't know what to feel towards her. After all, this was the first time I had seen her so crushed. I realized now that I had always admired Yolanda, who was full of confidence despite everything. I'm sorry for the disturbance. That was a prank planned by her and me. I'm not good at such things, and I apologize for the awkward atmosphere. Barry tried to smooth things over. The room, which had been buzzing, gradually calmed down, and I could hear people murmuring, so it was a prank. Regardless of how well he handled it, he was trying to look out for Yolanda, who had embarrassed herself in front of everyone. But it is true that I am gay, and it is also true that I love Melissa. From there, Barry spoke confidently. Yes, Barry is gay. When we got to know each other and started to grow closer, he told me himself. I was surprised and shocked, but he told me he still wanted to be with me. Despite having only been attracted to men, Barry grew to love me as a person beyond gender. It's a little different from romantic love, but he respects me deeply as a soulmate and as a person. His feelings settled into my heart. It was certainly shocking to have my previous notions overturned, but love is not only about romance. I felt a growing desire to respond to his feelings. I decided to love everything about him, his career, his good looks, his pure-hearted nature, and the fact that he sincerely faced his identity as a gay man while loving me. When Barry finished his speech, the room was filled with warm applause. Looking at my parents, I saw my father clapping hard with tears in his eyes and my mother pressing a tissue to her eyes. Dad, Mom, I'm going to be happy with him. The ceremony smoothly moved on to the entertainment portion. As I was about to ask Yolanda to return to her seat, she shook off my hand and whispered weakly, "What is this?" "This is stupid. I'm leaving." "Yolanda." She staggered to her feet and walked unsteadily toward the exit. I couldn't bring myself to follow her. On her way out, Yolanda passed by Fred, who had been sitting during Barry's speech. He called out to her. "Oh, you're leaving already? Oh, what's your name again? I forgot, but let's hang out again. I don't need a girlfriend right now, just friends." That was the final blow for Yolanda. "Oh man," she cried out like a child and dashed out of the venue. Yolanda. I called after her, but she didn't look back. Somehow the ceremony ended successfully, and Barry and I went on our honeymoon. After a long break, when I returned to work, Yolanda was gone. I heard that she had requested a transfer right after our wedding. While I felt a bit let down, I was also somewhat relieved because it would have been awkward to face her. So what happened to Yolanda after that? It seems she was so shocked by being deceived by Fred that her flashy lifestyle completely changed. She had been manipulating men and cheating without a care, but when she was the one betrayed, she quickly developed a distrust of men. Time has passed since then, and now several years have gone by since I turned 30. Yolanda is still single and hasn't been able to get married. Furthermore, the story of her speech at my wedding spread among our colleagues, and the people who used to fawn over her became distant. Her prideful nature meant even the younger colleagues didn't warm up to her, leaving her completely isolated and in the position of an office queen bee. As for me, I've drifted apart from Yolanda since the wedding, but I continue to work and live happily with Barry. Though we sleep in separate bedrooms, our hearts are undeniably close, and we can proudly say that we are each other's only partner. Marrying Barry made me realize what true love is for the first time. I look back and wonder what those days of lamenting about my ordinary life were for, as I am now so incredibly happy every single day.
"I'm going back to my parents' place for a while," I said. "If that's the case, don't bother coming back," my husband snapped. "Here's the divorce papers. They're already filled out. Take them and get out." He threw the papers at me, and without a word, I took them and went straight to City Hall to submit them. Little did he know, he would soon regret this decision. My name is Jessica, and I am 28 years old. I had been married to Bob, who is 30, for a year. Before our marriage, I worked as a freelance graphic designer from home, while Bob worked in the sales department. I met Bob 2 years ago when I was feeling down after a breakup. A friend introduced us, and although I wasn't looking to date anyone, Bob had already fallen for me after seeing my pictures. "I don't mind starting as friends," he said, asking me out. During our outings, Bob's kindness won me over, and before I knew it, I had fallen in love with him. Once I shared my feelings, we started dating. 6 months later, Bob proposed and we got married. "Jessica, you're a lucky woman. You've been chosen by me, the ace salesperson at the company, chased by many girls," Bob would often boast after we got married. Indeed, he was the star of the sales department and quite handsome. However, his constant bragging started to bother me. At the time, though, I found it endearing. Love is indeed blind. I adored my confident, kind, and strong husband Bob. Though we hadn't yet started a family, I cherished every moment spent with him. However, a year into our marriage, I encountered a problem. "Jessica, when will I get to see my grandchild?" That was my mother-in-law. From the moment we married, she began pressing us about starting a family every time we visited. Given that their house was just a short 15-minute drive away, we ended up having dinner there several times a month, enduring her persistent reminders. "We're still young, and we want to enjoy our time together a bit longer," I replied. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law let out an audible sigh. "You say you're young, but you'll be 30 soon. I'll give you another year, but that's it. You should start having babies soon. It won't get any easier." When I married into this family, I got pregnant right away. "Besides, you're just sitting around at home, aren't you?" It seemed my mother-in-law had never really acknowledged my job since before I married Bob, perhaps because few work-from-home options existed back then. Furthermore, the reason we hadn't started a family yet was because Bob insisted on us enjoying more time together, just the two of us. "No, that's not true. I work diligently from home. I've told you before, I earn nearly as much as Bob," I argued. "Isn't Bob just covering for you? You're just fooling around," she retorted. That's not true. Bob, please say something, I pleaded. Huh? Oh, Bob seldom intervened in these situations. According to him, there's no point arguing with Mom. She doesn't listen, so it's a waste of time. Just let her talk and don't take it too seriously. Even though I was upset, I wished he would stand up for me more. Instead, he sat on the couch, absorbed in his phone, barely engaging in the conversation. Well, you can play around all you want, but since you have so much time on your hands, you should fulfill your duties as a wife. If you don't have a baby within this year, I may have to ask you to leave Bob, she declared. What? I exclaimed. It's simple. Bob is our only child. We need a daughter-in-law who can produce an heir, she explained. My husband remained silent, offering no defense while I faced this criticism. Fuming with anger, I confronted him as soon as we got home. Why didn't you say anything back there? You're the one who keeps saying we should wait to have children. You need to stand up to your mother, I demanded. I'm sorry. Mom's just stuck in her old ways. She can't let go of the idea that we should have a baby right after getting married, he replied. I understand that, but can't you speak up for me with your mother? I implored. Like I said, Mom's stubborn. It won't make a difference what I say. Remember, Jess, just nod along and it'll blow over, he replied. But she threatened divorce if I don't get pregnant this year, I said. Don't worry about that. She's just trying to scare you, he assured me. By the way, not because of what she said, but I actually want us to start thinking about having a baby. Why are you so hesitant? I'm not opposed to it. I just want more time for just us two. Once we have a baby, you'll be completely focused on the baby and we won't have time alone, he explained, hugging me. I found his concern endearing and hugged him back. However, despite his words at home, he never supported me when we visited his parents. After that, his mother began calling me daily to inquire if I was pregnant yet. I grew weary of this constant pressure. I had never confided in her before to avoid putting my husband in a bad light, but I had reached my breaking point. Finally, I explained to her that Bob wasn't ready for children yet, but she brushed it off. That's because you're making Bob say that. He would never say such a thing, she insisted. That's not true. Bob is the one who wants to wait. I want a baby too, I asserted. Oh really, Bob, is that true? She turned to him. No, that's not exactly it. I mean, I do think we should enjoy just the two of us a bit longer, and Jessica is okay with that. He stumbled through his response. I was stunned by his words. While I agreed with Bob's desire to wait, his response made it sound like I had misled his mother about wanting a baby. As expected, his mother shot me a disapproving look after hearing his wavering answer. You see, even Jessica agrees with me. Now, please hurry up and have a baby. Don't keep us waiting, she insisted. In the end, I was the one who took the blame. When I confronted Bob at home about how he had spoken to me, he simply said, I'll handle it better next time, but never brought it up again. Lately, I've been feeling increasingly anxious, wondering why I had to endure such treatment. There was a reason behind Bob's reluctance to have children, though. The truth came to light on a particular day off. It was one of those days when Bob spent time with his friends, leaving me home alone. Initially, I lounged around, dreading the upcoming visit to my in-laws and anticipating more criticism from my mother-in-law. With Bob away, I decided to take a break and went shopping. A solo shopping trip, a rare treat for me lately, helped clear my mind, and I decided to take a break at a cafe with a terrace. There, something unbelievable caught my eye. It was Bob with an unfamiliar woman and a baby. I quickly ducked out of sight to avoid being seen by Bob. They seemed engrossed in conversation, and suddenly, Bob gently picked up the baby and comforted it with a smile. I couldn't comprehend what I was witnessing. My mind went blank as I continued to watch. He had said he was with friends, but was this woman one of them? Since we married, Bob had introduced me to all his friends, and I had never met this woman before. Then Bob kissed the baby on the cheek. Seeing Bob show such tenderness to a strange baby after claiming he wasn't ready for children with me pained my heart deeply. The thought crossed my mind that perhaps he didn't want children with me because he didn't truly love me. Tears blurred my vision uncontrollably. Could he be cheating on me? The mere idea constricted my chest even more. I snapped a photo of them together, appearing happy with the intention of confronting Bob later. Just as I was preparing to leave, Bob handed a white envelope to the woman and the baby, and they started to depart. I hurriedly made my way home, desperate to avoid encountering Bob. I'm going back to my parents' place for a while, my husband declared, his tone firm as he tossed the divorce papers in my direction. If that's how it's going to be, don't bother coming back. Take these papers and get out. That's how Bob ended our marriage right then and there, with those papers hitting the floor between us. I picked them up silently and headed straight to City Hall to file them. Little did Bob know, he would soon regret his decision. My name is Jessica, 28 years old. I have been married to Bob, who is 2 years older than me, for just over a year. Before tying the knot, I worked as a freelance graphic designer from the comfort of home, while Bob thrived in the sales department. I met Bob 2 years ago when I was rebounding from a breakup. A mutual friend introduced us, and despite my initial reluctance to date, Bob, taken by my photos and story, asked me out, suggesting we start as friends. As Bob and I spent more time together, I found myself deeply touched by his kindness. Before long, I realized I had fallen in love with him. Once I expressed my feelings, we began dating. 6 months into our relationship, Bob proposed, and we joyfully married soon after. "Jessica, you're so fortunate," Bob often remarked, boasting about his status as the top salesperson at the company, popular among many. His confidence and charm initially captivated me, though I sometimes wondered about his need to flaunt it. Yet in those early days, I found it endearing. Love truly has a way of blinding us. I cherished my time with Bob, enjoying his company and the life we were building together. Although we hadn't yet started a family, I was content. However, a year into our marriage, an issue arose. "Hey Jessica, when are you going to give me a grandchild?" That was my mother-in-law, who had been pressing the matter ever since our wedding. Living just a short drive away, we visited them often for dinner, where I faced her persistent questioning month after month. "We're still young, so we decided to enjoy our time together," I explained calmly. My mother-in-law sighed audibly, her disapproval palpable. "You say you're young, but you'll be 30 soon. I'll give you a year to see how it goes. That should be enough time, right? You should start having babies soon, or it might become difficult for you. When I married into this family, I got pregnant right away. Besides, you're just idling at home, aren't you?" Since my early days of freelancing from home, my mother-in-law never truly acknowledged my work as a legitimate job. This perception persisted even after I married Bob. Moreover, our decision to postpone having children was primarily driven by Bob's desire for more time together as a couple. "No, that's not true. I work diligently from home. I've mentioned before that I earn almost as much as Bob," I defended. "Are you sure Bob isn't just covering for you? It seems like you're just passing the time," she retorted. "That's not fair. Bob, please say something," I pleaded, hoping for his support. "Ha! Oh, Bob rarely spoke up in such situations. His usual stance was, there's no point arguing with Mom. She doesn't listen to what I say, so it's best to let her talk and not take it too seriously." Despite my distress, I wished he would show a bit more support. Instead, he lounged on the couch, absorbed in his phone, barely engaged in the conversation. "Well, you can do as you please, but since you have plenty of time, you should fulfill your duties as a wife. If you don't have a baby within this year, I may have to ask you to leave, Bob," she asserted. "What?" I exclaimed. "It's simple. Bob is our only child. We need a daughter-in-law who can provide an heir." My husband remained passive, offering no defense while I faced her criticism. I was seething with anger as we returned home. "Why didn't you say anything back there? You're the one who keeps insisting we wait to have children. You need to stand up to your mother," I confronted him. "I'm sorry, Mom's just old-fashioned. She's stuck on the idea that you should have a baby right after marriage. I understand that, but couldn't you at least speak up to her? Like I mentioned, Mom is stubborn. She won't budge no matter what I say. You know, Jess, sometimes it's best to just nod along and let it pass. But your mother said if I don't get pregnant this year, she'll force us to divorce. Don't worry about that. She's just bluffing." "Hey, not because of what she said, but I've actually been thinking about starting a family with you. Why are you hesitant?" "I'm not against it. I just want more time for us alone. Once we have a baby, you'll be fully occupied with the baby and we won't have much time together," he explained, pulling me into a hug. I found his concern endearing, so I hugged him back. However, despite his assurances at home, he never stood up for me when we visited his parents. After that, his mother began calling me daily, incessantly asking if I was pregnant yet. I grew weary of this relentless pressure. I kept silent about it, not wanting to paint Bob in a negative light, but eventually I reached my breaking point. I finally disclosed to her that Bob wasn't ready for children yet, but she brushed it off. "That's just because you're putting words in Bob's mouth. He would never say something like that," she insisted. "That's not true. Bob himself expressed that he wants to wait. I also want a baby," I countered. "Really? Bob, is that true?" she demanded. No, that's not exactly what I meant. I mean, I do want us to enjoy some more time together, and Jessica's okay with that too," he stumbled through his response. I was taken aback by his words. While I agreed with Bob's desire to wait, his response made it sound like I had misled his mother about our intentions regarding starting a family. As expected, his mother shot me a disapproving look after hearing his uncertain answer. "See, you agree too. Now please hurry up and have a baby. Don't keep us waiting." In the end, I bore the brunt of the blame. When I confronted Bob at home about his words, he said, "I'll handle it better next time," but he never brought it up again. Lately, I've been feeling increasingly anxious, wondering why I have to endure this. But there was a reason behind Bob's reluctance to have children. The truth came to light on a particular day off. I was home alone as Bob had his monthly outing with friends. Initially lounging at home, I had planned to visit my in-laws later in the evening, already dreading the inevitable nagging from my mother-in-law. With Bob absent, I took the opportunity to clear my mind with a solo shopping trip. Afterward, I decided to relax at a cafe with a terrace. It was there that I witnessed something unbelievable. Bob was seated with an unfamiliar woman and a baby. I quickly hid to avoid being seen. They appeared to be engaged in a pleasant conversation, and suddenly, Bob gently comforted the baby with a smile. I couldn't comprehend what was unfolding before me. My mind went blank as I continued to watch. Bob had claimed he was out with friends, but who was this woman? He had introduced me to all his friends since we married, and I had never met her. Then, to my surprise, Bob kissed the baby on the cheek. Seeing Bob affectionately dote on an unfamiliar baby, despite his insistence on not wanting children with me, deeply wounded me. Thoughts raced through my mind. Did he reject having children because he didn't truly love me? Tears blurred my vision as my heart clenched with the possibility of betrayal. Could Bob be cheating on me? I snapped a photo of them, capturing their apparent happiness, intending to confront Bob later. Just as I prepared to leave, Bob handed a white envelope to the woman and the baby, ready to depart. To avoid facing him directly, I hurried back home. 15 minutes later, Bob returned. I wasted no time in confronting him. "You were out with friends, right?" I questioned sharply. "Yeah, I was. Why are you acting weird as soon as I get home?" Bob replied defensively. "Is this woman also a friend?" I thrust the photo in front of him. Bob's expression paled instantly. "How did you get this photo?" he stammered, clearly caught off guard. "I happened to come across you guys when I was out. Can you explain what's going on? Are you cheating?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and anger. "No, I'm not cheating," Bob quickly replied. "Then what is it? And why did you give her a white envelope at the end? What's that all about?" I pressed on, needing answers to make sense of the scene I had witnessed. Bob hesitated, his guilt evident in his expression as he began to explain reluctantly. "Well, I meant to tell you eventually, but you know I was quite popular before I met you. I had a few flings and one of those women got pregnant." I was stunned into silence by Bob's revelation. This was the first time I was hearing this story, and it shattered my understanding of our relationship. I had been unaware of this situation even after we married. Apparently, by the time I found out, she was already 7 months pregnant, and it was too late for her to consider an abortion. I regretted ignoring her calls all this time. She didn't want to marry me, she just wanted me to acknowledge our child. Out of concern for the child growing up without a father, I agreed to acknowledge our child. We agreed that I would visit once a month. She's also struggling financially, so I've been helping her out with money. My world turned hazy as my husband's words sank in, and I sank to my knees. "Jessica, are you all right?" Bob rushed to my side, but I recoiled from his touch. "Just hold on. Something doesn't add up here. She was 7 months pregnant around the time we got married. Does that mean you were involved with her while we were dating?" I demanded, my voice trembling with disbelief and hurt. "I already told you, it's not like that. I cut things off completely once I started dating you," Bob insisted. "But we were already seeing each other, weren't we?" I countered. "We were, but we hadn't officially committed yet." "Exactly. I can't wrap my head around this. You were pursuing a relationship with me, yet you were involved with someone else, I exclaimed, struggling to process the betrayal. Jessica, I wasn't certain about us at that point. I felt like I didn't have a choice, okay? I never expected her to get pregnant, Bob explained, his voice pleading. But you were still putting yourself in situations where she could get pregnant, weren't you? I pressed, tears welling in my eyes. Well, my husband suddenly faltered. I couldn't believe the irresponsibility my husband was showing. It infuriated me even more that he had kept silent about this for an entire year after our marriage. Could it be? Did you refuse to have a child with me because you already had one? I asked, my voice shaking with a mixture of disbelief and anger. My husband flinched at my words and then let out a bitter laugh. No, I plan to have children with you eventually, but like I mentioned earlier, I've been providing financial support to her every month. If we had a baby, I don't know how you would manage work-wise. Financially, it would be quite tough, so I thought I'd wait until I was a bit more stable before having a child with you. I was left dumbfounded by my husband's explanation more than I was angry. You need to tell your mother about this, I said firmly. What? Bob exclaimed, clearly taken aback. Isn't it obvious? She's always pressuring me about having children, and you act like you don't know or speak as if I'm the one who doesn't want children. No, I can't possibly tell my parents. They wouldn't understand why I have a child with another woman while I'm married to you. Isn't that just selfish? So, I've had to go along with your selfishness and bear the brunt of it. What are you saying? Are you saying you don't enjoy being with my family? I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying I shouldn't be blamed for something that's not my fault. I'm not saying I don't like my mother-in-law. Why are you acting like this? I've been apologizing, haven't I? And yet you're still complaining. Jessica, you're lucky to be married to someone as successful as me, and you're complaining just because I have a child. It's not a trivial matter. That's enough. There's no point in talking to you anymore. I need to think about my future, so I'm going back to my parents' house for a while. Excuse me, what is this all about? How can you even think like that? Do you expect me to accept everything just because I'm your wife? I was stunned by my husband's words. How could he believe that being his wife meant I had to easily accept something as significant as the existence of a child he had kept hidden? I was also furious that he hadn't disclosed this to his parents and had instead portrayed me as the problem in front of my mother-in-law. Do you honestly believe being a wife means unquestioningly accepting everything? Regardless, I'm going back to my parents' house. Perhaps you should take some time to reflect while I'm away. As I spoke and began to rise, he swiftly stood up, retrieved something from our bedroom, and hurled it towards me. If that's how you feel, then don't bother coming back. If you can't accept all of me, you're not my wife. Here are the divorce papers. They're already filled out. Take them and leave immediately. Yes, my husband had thrown divorce papers at me. You've already filled them out? What does this mean? I could understand if you were suggesting divorce, but having them ready beforehand. Did you plan this? I couldn't believe it, and I asked him. His response was a scornful laugh. You never know what life will throw at you, so it's best to be prepared for anything, right? I mean, I liked your face, but if you can't accept all of me, then I don't need you anymore. Fortunately, there are plenty of women who want to marry a guy like me. I just need to choose a good one from among them. In other words, I have plenty of options for a wife. His words ignited a fire within me. I needed time to process everything, especially the bombshell about his hidden child, yet here he was implying I was replaceable. It was infuriating beyond belief. Gripping the divorce papers tightly, I shot him a glare. I never imagined you could stoop so low. Fine, I'll grant your wish and divorce you. I'll pack my things when you're not around. We probably won't see each other again. Goodbye. With that, I stormed out of the house, swiftly filled out the divorce papers, and submitted them to City Hall. But simply divorcing him wasn't enough. Once back at my parents' house, I recounted everything to my father. The following day, I took a day off work to gather my belongings. Though I mourned the shattered dreams of a happy marriage, I also felt relieved to have severed ties before investing more years with such a man. Wiping away my tears, I resolved to move forward. Just as I finished packing and the delivery service arrived to collect my belongings, my ex-husband called. Hello, Jessica. I was wrong. Forgive me. My ex-husband's voice on the phone was filled with desperation as soon as I answered. I couldn't help but smirk. Forgive you? After everything? Weren't you the one who initiated the divorce? I merely followed through on your decision, I retorted coolly. No, that was a mistake. I regret it deeply. You haven't submitted the divorce papers yet, have you? He pleaded. Of course I did. You handed them to me yourself, I replied, incredulous. What? Please, let's get married again. I can't live without you, Jessica. I almost chuckled at his feeble attempt. It seemed my conversation with my father had left my ex-husband in a tough spot, and rightfully so. My father held a significant position at a major client of my ex-husband's company, a fact my ex seemed to have overlooked in his haste to divorce me. I took satisfaction in knowing I had caused him some discomfort. Did you lose the contract with my father's company? That's unfortunate, especially for the ace of the sales department. It will be interesting to see how you handle this situation, I remarked casually. No, that's why I want to start over with you. There are plenty of replacements for me out there, right? You should try to find one. With that, I ended the call and allowed myself a broad smile. As I later learned from my father, my ex-husband had been demoted due to his role in losing the major client's contract. It was better than being fired, but his reputation within the company had taken a significant hit. After revealing the truth about his illegitimate child to my in-laws, they initially sought to reconcile him with the child's mother. However, due to her financial situation, they declined to pursue the remarriage, prompting my ex-husband to reach out to me again. Naturally, I refused. Who would willingly return to such a toxic environment? In contrast, life after divorce had treated me well. I moved back to my parents' home, focused on my career, and recently secured a significant contract with a major client. My work was flourishing, and while I kept an open heart for the possibility of meeting someone new in the future, for now, I was content focusing on my professional success. Sarah passed away. I received a call while I was taking care of my daughter, Sarah's child. According to the police, Sarah and her husband Spencer were hit by a car while crossing an intersection, and soon after, they passed away. The sudden news left me in shock. My heart raced and I felt dizzy. Sarah had been laughing with us just a few hours ago. I rushed to confirm the news, and from that point on, there was no time to grieve as I was overwhelmed with various procedures. During this time, a discussion about the future of Sarah's triplets with Spencer's parents, Susan and Isaac, came up. When I asked Susan and Isaac about what would happen to Sarah and Spencer's children, Susan said something unbelievable. What should we do with the kids? They hassle. Maybe put them in a facility. I wondered if my ears were deceiving me. The feeling of disbelief filled my heart. During Sarah's life, the triplets had lived with their grandparents on their father's side. Despite us not seeing them as often, our emotional attachment to the grandchildren should have been much deeper. Aren't you worried about the future of your adorable grandchildren? I asked. They should have adored them so much. It's all right. My husband and I will take care of Sarah and Spencer's children with all our love. Nearly 20 years have passed since then. Though we faced many challenges, I am proud that all three have grown into fine adults. I never forgot the sadness of losing Sarah and Spencer, but I always thought of living happily for their sake too. Then one day, the doorbell rang suddenly. When I opened the door, there stood Susan and Isaac, whom I hadn't seen in years. Susan and Isaac ignored my surprise, entered, and faced the triplets. Then they said something unbelievable. Would you like to live with us again? My name is Kennedy. My husband Harold was my high school classmate. We started dating then and got married after becoming working adults. At the age of 27, we were blessed with a child. Her name was Sarah. As our only daughter, we devoted all our love to her. Sarah grew up to be a bright and energetic child. When Sarah became a college student, she introduced us to her boyfriend, Spencer, who was a year older than her. One day, she approached us with a request. Mom, I'd like you to keep the end of this month, Sunday, free. Dad, too. We have something we want to discuss. It's about Spencer and me. The end of this month? Sure. Harold has the day off, so that's fine. But what's it about? I'll explain everything then. Sorry, but please make sure you're free that day, and tell Dad not to go fishing. I was curious about what was going on, but Sarah wouldn't say more until the day. Lost in a whirlwind of thoughts, I awaited the day. When it finally arrived, Sarah mentioned that the discussion would be at Spencer's family home, which I somewhat expected. Such occasions where both families come together to talk are rare after all. Never having met Spencer's parents before, my nerves were barely concealed as we made our way to their house. Nice to meet you. I'm Spencer's mother. Please come in. Nice to meet you. We appreciate your hospitality. We were greeted by Spencer's mother, Susan. My nervousness only grew with Susan's monotone voice, as it did seem very welcoming upon entering their house. It was clear from the start that something was off. Spencer's father, Isaac, and Spencer were already seated, and an uneasy atmosphere hung in the air. We sat down in front of Spencer's family, ready to listen. Slowly, Spencer began to speak. "Sarah and I are expecting a child. We apologize for the sudden news, but please allow us to marry and have this child." Despite his nervousness, Spencer made sure to look us in the eyes as he spoke. They were not yet married, and both were still students. You could tell he expected opposition. His voice trembled slightly. After Spencer finished, silence ensued. Gathering my courage, I voiced my concerns about them proceeding with the pregnancy. "Do you understand what it means to have a child? What about school? How do you plan to support yourselves? You've never worked before. It's more challenging than you think." Following that, Spencer's parents, Susan and Isaac, also opposed the idea, deeming them too young. "Don't be ridiculous. You're still children yourselves, talking about marriage and a baby. Who do you think has been paying for your education, you ingrates?" Their words were a torrent of anger. However, Sarah and Spencer's determination was much stronger than expected, unwavering in their decision to have the baby. After much discussion, Sarah and Spencer pleaded with us again. "Please, we've talked about this over and over, promising to overcome any hardship together. Please." Hearing Sarah's almost disappearing voice stirred something in me. Sarah had always been such a good child, never once demanding, and now, for the first time, she was conveying her wishes to us with all her might. Although I initially opposed, as we talked more, I began to understand the depth of their commitment. I could see their resolve was genuine. Still somewhat anxious, I decided to support their decision to marry and have the baby if that was what Sarah wanted. Sarah seemed relieved by my support, but Spencer's parents remained steadfastly opposed. "If you absolutely cannot accept it, then Spencer and I will cut ties. That way, we won't be a burden, right?" Sensing the conversation was going nowhere, Spencer quietly made his stance clear. "Spencer, isn't that a bit too drastic? Let's think this over calmly." I gently urged Spencer to reconsider. "I know it sounds drastic, but if this is the only way," Spencer insisted. Startled by the mention of cutting ties, Susan and Isaac hesitated. They requested a brief consultation and moved to a different location. I caught glimpses of them whispering and casting glances our way from the corner of my eye. After a short while, Susan and Isaac returned, sharing a smug smile before presenting their decision. They would allow the marriage and pregnancy, but with conditions. The initial relief of their acceptance was quickly overshadowed by the word conditions, making everyone but Susan and Isaac tense. The stipulation was that Sarah and Spencer must live with Spencer's parents at their home. Additionally, we, Sarah's parents, were to provide Susan and Isaac with living expenses for Sarah. The thought of Sarah, who had never lived on her own, much less with her in-laws, filled me with apprehension. "What's the matter? Any complaints? If you can't accept these terms, then we won't approve of the pregnancy or the marriage. And of course, we'll categorically refuse to cut ties with Spencer. What will it be, Sarah?" Susan's confrontational tone caused Sarah to look down. "Okay, thank you for your approval," Sarah reluctantly agreed after some thought. The anxious look on Sarah's face made me feel a twinge of sadness. Though my worries never fully dissipated, seeing Spencer gently support Sarah, I decided to keep a watchful eye on them for a while. Soon, Sarah and Spencer proceeded to drop out of college to support their upcoming child. Spencer started working at a company owned by a friend of Harold, while Sarah assisted with piecework and household chores under Susan, her future mother-in-law. Harold, who had introduced Spencer to the job despite having no work experience, did his best to help them adjust to their new responsibilities. Initially, I inquired about his progress out of concern. Contrary to Harold's worries, Spencer was well regarded at his workplace. "Spencer seems to be doing really well at work. I'm quite proud." Harold spoke with pride, showing how diligently Spencer worked and saved money. Our initial anxiety gradually transformed into a growing sense of reassurance about Sarah and Spencer. Time passed, and Sarah safely gave birth to triplets. When I first heard it was triplets, I was so surprised that I kept asking Sarah if there was a mistake, a memory that still stands vividly in my mind. I don't know anyone in my circle who has had triplets, and I've heard that multiple pregnancies carry higher risks compared to singleton pregnancies. Amidst these concerns, the days were filled with worry about whether they would be born safely. But the triplets were developing well in Sarah's womb. When they were born, they were incredibly adorable, truly becoming the apple of my eye. Nancy was the first to arrive, the only girl among them. Her eyes were big and beautifully double-lidded, a very charming little girl right from the start. Then came Tanner, the smallest at birth, making us hope he would grow strong and healthy. Lastly was Taylor, who consumed the most milk, making Sarah feel he was robust. Sarah and Spencer cherished their children deeply, and we as grandparents frequently visited Isaac's house to dote on them. After giving birth to the triplets, Sarah started working a part-time job. The following year, Spencer, wanting to provide more for his adorable children, and Sarah changed jobs to earn more, working harder than before. Seeing Sarah's family come together joyfully reminded me of Sarah's childhood. I deeply wished for their happiness to last forever. One day, Sarah's family planned to visit our home. Harold was looking forward to playing with our grandchildren. From the morning, I was excited too, with the table laden with their favorite snacks and toys. Soon, the doorbell rang, and there stood Sarah, Spencer, and the triplets.
Hello, Grandma and Grandpa.
Tanner, who was small at birth, had grown into a lively boy.
Taylor ran after Tanner into the living room.
Nancy, being the only girl, seemed a bit shy compared to her brothers. Seeing Nancy, Harold crouched to her level, offering his hand.
Hello, Nancy.
There are some sweets over there. Shall we go together? Comforted by Harold's gentle voice, Nancy took his hand and walked towards the living room. Spencer followed them, and Sarah and I walked behind. Unexpectedly, Sarah stopped. I turned around, wondering why she had paused. Mom, there's something I want to talk about, just the two of you. Seeing her unusually serious face, I felt a slight unease. Okay, shall we talk in your room then? We went to the room Sarah used before moving out. Sarah sat on the bed, and I took a seat on a chair. Then, looking determined, Sarah started to speak. Once the kids turned 5, I'm thinking of moving out from my in-laws' house. What's wrong? Did something happen? I had never heard any complaints or grievances from Sarah, who had lived with her in-laws until now. Sarah began to speak quietly, and after confiding in me, left to join her children. Later, Sarah and Spencer asked us to watch the kids for a few hours as they wanted to look for a new place to live after moving out of the in-laws' house. Of course, take some time for yourselves, I encouraged with a smile and a hand on their children's heads. Sarah and Spencer left the house. It had been quite some time since Sarah's family arrived, so Nancy, who was initially nervous, was now engrossed in the toys we had prepared. Tanner and Taylor were playing together with block toys. I was all set to keep them entertained until Sarah and Spencer returned. How many hours had passed since they left? I was starting to worry when I glanced at the clock, and just then the phone rang. A bad feeling washed over me as I rushed to answer it. It was the police on the line. Yes, that's me. Yes, okay, understood. The police officer's voice seemed so distant as I hung up the phone in shock. Harold, sensing something was wrong, came over and shook my shoulder. What's wrong? You look pale. My voice trembled as I explained that Sarah and Spencer had been in an accident. They were hit by a car while crossing an intersection and had died instantly. How could I possibly explain this to their innocent children, still playing joyfully? The mere thought brought tears to my eyes. Harold and I hurried to the hospital to start the necessary procedures and confirmations. Harold's hand on my shoulder was trembling, making the reality all the more poignant. After confirming Sarah and Spencer's death, we were swamped with arrangements without even a moment to grieve. There were endless visits to the police and municipal offices, funeral arrangements, and notifying relatives. At Sarah and Spencer's funeral, friends and Spencer's colleagues mourned their untimely deaths, highlighting how beloved they were. It struck me how fortunate they were to have such a supportive community. While Harold and I were busy with funeral staff and attendees, Susan and Isaac were surrounded by acquaintances shedding endless tears. Despite our own sadness, we were just trying to stay strong amidst the overwhelming pain. I muttered to myself, heartbroken during the hectic funeral. Susan's promise to raise the triplets well was the only thing that offered me a sliver of comfort, showing her caring heart for them. Even after the funeral ended, the busy days continued without a break, especially with taking care of the grandchildren. Since the day Sarah and Spencer had their accident, the triplets have been living with us. We didn't tell them directly about their parents' passing, just that they wouldn't be seeing them anymore. Even though they're young, they must find it strange not to see their parents return after a whole day. Understanding they won't see their beloved parents again, tears welled up in my eyes. The eldest, Tanner and Taylor, perhaps not fully grasping the situation, looked at crying Nancy with curiosity and gently patted her head. "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Shall I bring you some medicine?" The boys, especially being protective of Nancy, the only girl, asked her gently. They must feel it's their duty to protect her, even unconsciously. Embracing these kind-hearted three, I too shed tears. Harold and I had never spent a night with these children before. Perhaps out of consideration for their in-laws, Sarah and her family had never stayed over at our house. We were completely unfamiliar with their meal schedules, nap times, or how to put them to bed. Everything was uncharted territory, leaving Harold and me feeling overwhelmed. Tanner and Taylor probably started to sense something was wrong, realizing they couldn't see their beloved parents. They became anxious and started crying. I wanted to stay close to Nancy, who hadn't smiled since the accident, but there were too many urgent tasks to handle. I tried calling Susan and Isaac, hoping they could share some of the burden. Hello. I was hoping to ask for your help with some arrangements." Susan's response over the phone was cold. We're not really knowledgeable about that. You probably handle it more smoothly, right? We had never spent a night with these children before, to be honest. We weren't experts either. We were just trying our best because it needed to be done. However, no matter how much we repeated it, they couldn't help with the various tasks. "Could you at least stay with the children until we finish the procedures? They must be missing you," I asked. "No, we're quite busy ourselves. Honestly, we don't have the capacity," was their response. "But please, I'm sorry, we have to go now." And with that, the call was abruptly ended. Further attempts to ask for their help over the phone were unsuccessful. No good response ever came. Struggling with the grief of losing Sarah and Spencer, Harold and I managed all the arrangements and took care of the grandchildren, truly exhausted. What remained was the discussion about the division of the estate and custody. Susan and Isaac had not shown their faces since they left their belongings at our house. Up until the day of the discussions, I remembered how much they adored their first grandchildren. Now, understating their parents were gone, the once lively boys had become withdrawn. Harold and I couldn't escape our sorrow, continuing to live in a heavy atmosphere, exhausted from all the arrangements. I hoped the discussions would proceed smoothly. On the day of the discussion, Susan and Isaac arrived at our house and were led to the living room. "Just going to talk for a bit. Can you play here?" I said to Tanner, the eldest, who obediently took Taylor and Nancy to another room. When I first brought up the future of the children, Susan immediately started discussing the estate. Susan argued that since they had taken care of Sarah's family, all the assets should go to them. Holding back my urge to confront her priority over assets rather than the children, I tried to steer the conversation back to the kids. Then, Susan said something unbelievable. "The kids are too much trouble. How about putting them in a facility?" I doubted my ears. Sarah's children, whom we've lovingly raised, are her precious treasures. Just like Sarah, we hold the belief that these adorable grandchildren are invaluable to us. But it seems Susan and Isaac stood on different ground. Without any sign of remorse, they made shocking statements, escalating my distrust. They pushed all the troubles onto us while demanding the estate simply because they had lived together in the past. Remembering what Sarah confided in me, I clenched my fists in anger. Then I slowly began to speak. "Sarah's children will be taken care of by us. We'll discuss the estate later," I said firmly. Despite my tone, Susan and Isaac kept insisting on transferring the estate rights to them, expecting to gain control. Today, their disregard for their grandchildren, who they once adored, turned my anger into dismay and sadness. What was the meaning of their promise at the funeral to raise the triplets well? Their current behavior made it clear that those words were just for show. I wanted to confront them but refrained, weighed down by the grief of losing Sarah and Spencer and the exhaustion from all the procedures. Of course, taking in our grandchildren was not an issue for us. It might take some time to adjust, but we were confident in our love and care for them. As Susan and Isaac continued to talk about the estate, I quietly resolved in my heart. Impatient with the unproductive discussion, they eventually left our house, adamant about not handing over the estate. Years have passed since Sarah and Spencer died, almost 2 decades. I still remember the joy of legally adopting the triplets. Had these precious children remained with Susan and Isaac, I shudder to think how they might have been treated. The thought alone fills me with dread. We subtly informed the triplets about becoming estranged from Susan and Isaac. The fact that they were never taken in or visited by them is something I fear would hurt them, and I've still not managed to express it directly. Throughout my explanation, none of them looked particularly sad, simply acknowledging with a "we understand." Without their parents, they might have felt lonely during school activities or when interacting with mom friends, struggling with things they couldn't do well, yet all three have grown up to be such honest and wonderful children, not letting those challenges affect them. Now, they truly feel like my own children, carrying on Sarah and Spencer's legacy. We were living peaceful days with the triplets when one day, the doorbell rang. Opening the door, I was surprised to find Susan and Isaac standing there. "Hello, it's been a while," Isaac greeted as if the years hadn't affected him. "Oh, it's been a long time. What brings you here all of a sudden?" Ignoring my bewildered reaction, Susan and Isaac entered our house as if it was a matter of course. I hurried after them, taking a good look at their backs for the first time in years. Since then, Susan and Isaac had contacted us a few times about the estate, but they had never once come to see the grandchildren. I had pleaded with them to visit the grieving children, even if just briefly, but busy schedules and other excuses always got in the way, and they never accepted. Our communication dwindled over time, and seeing each other now was truly rare. It seems we've both aged quite a bit, perhaps feeling mutual about this. Susan, leaning on a cane, stood with Isaac's support. I ushered them into the guest room and then briefly explained the situation to Taylor, who was in the living room. "I've got another set of grandparents visiting. Could you fetch Nancy and Tanner for greetings? Are they the ones you mentioned were estranged from?" "Yes, that's them." "I wonder what they want." Muttering in confusion, Taylor went off to fetch Nancy and Tanner from his room. Shortly after, led by Taylor, Nancy and Tanner joined us in the guest room. Upon seeing the grown triplets, Susan and Isaac immediately showed a gentle smile, grasping Tanner's hand warmly. "You've grown so much." As Susan fondly stroked Tanner's hand, I was stunned, but Susan, undeterred by my reaction, made an unbelievable proposal. "Why don't we live together again, like old times?" This unexpected suggestion left everyone but Susan and Isaac wide-eyed. Why now, after all this time? If they wanted to live together, why did they push the triplets away back then? They weren't there when the kids truly needed someone. They hadn't shown their faces for so long. Overwhelmed with too many unspoken thoughts, I couldn't decide what to say first. Without a word from me or the triplets, Susan pressed on. "You know, my legs have been quite bad lately. Isaac's been supporting me, but we never know what might happen to us, right? It would be reassuring to have you by our side." At first, I thought they wanted to reconnect now that the grandchildren were grown and less of a burden, but it seemed not to be the case. Were they planning to use these children for their own care after abandoning them so heartlessly before? After abandoning their precious grandchildren like that, how dare they speak so opportunistically now? I was beyond exasperated by their unchanged demeanor, speechless but determined not to let these children be exploited yet. Before I could voice my objection, it was Tanner who spoke up. "Who are you? Can you leave if you're going to be a bother?" Tanner, looking annoyed, shook off Susan's grasp. In agreement with Tanner, Nancy and Taylor also looked sternly at Susan and Isaac. Surprised by the unexpected resistance, Susan and Isaac showed their anger. Then Susan pointed at me, accusing, "She's the one who tore you away from us. We wanted to live together, but it wasn't possible because of her." The grandchildren, noticing the lack of sincerity in Susan and Isaac's words, continued to cast cold glances at them. Over time, they had grown significantly, now looking down on Susan and Isaac. Simply by standing, Tanner and Taylor stood protectively in front of Nancy and me. Susan and Isaac, disliking the show of defiance from Tanner and Taylor, clenched their jaws tightly. Then they exclaimed, "They used to be such obedient and good kids before. You've been brainwashed by this too." At that moment, my patience ran out. Suppressing the urge to shout back in anger, I retrieved something from the drawer and presented it to Susan. Sarah confided in me before her passing. This was given to me at that time. Recalling Sarah's pained expression that day, my voice deepened. "It's all written here, how harshly you treated Sarah just before her accident." Sarah had handed me a small diary. It contained dates and entries resembling a journal. Initially, I had only skimmed through its pages. After Sarah and Spencer's death, as life gradually became more manageable, I remembered the diary and read it carefully, page by page. The entries detailed how Susan exploited Sarah's guilt over their shotgun marriage and her student status, treating her poorly. Sarah endured in silence, unable to share her struggles with anyone. As her pregnancy progressed and her appetite increased, Susan complained about the rising food expenses and reduced Sarah's portions behind Sarah and Spencer's backs. Money was taken from their wallets and accounts. The diary detailed various abuses Sarah had suffered at the hands of Susan and Isaac. Some pages were smudged with what seemed like tears, illustrating the depth of Sarah's pain. Every day, Susan and Isaac hesitantly took the diary, read the first page, then immediately closed it, choosing not to read further. Their reaction confirmed the truth of the contents written within. Although I hesitated to speak of the painful circumstances in front of the triplets, the thought of them possibly being exploited by Susan and Isaac compelled me to share the testimony Sarah had entrusted to me. Sarah had confided in me painfully about her struggles, how her heart eroded with each act of forbearance, and her frustration at not being able to get along with Susan. Remembering Sarah's plight, I felt my grip tighten. How much Sarah suffered, those words I had directed at myself, wondering why I hadn't noticed Sarah's struggles until she confided in me. Despite seeing the diary, Susan claimed not to remember any such thing, showing no signs of apology or remorse. Faced with Susan and Isaac's persistent requests to live together again, I sighed deeply, holding back tears of anger at Susan and Isaac, and at myself for not recognizing Sarah's pain. Nancy gently patted my back. The triplets, even at their young age, faintly remembered Susan being harsh towards Sarah. Nancy, especially being a mama's girl, was always by Sarah's side at home. She distinctly remembered Susan's stern behavior towards Sarah, particularly when Spencer wasn't around. The one clear memory she had was that Sarah often looked sad after talking with Susan. Nancy shared her frustration about being unable to do anything as a child living with Susan and Isaac. I was taken aback, as they had never spoken of these things until now, perhaps sparing Harold and me any worry. At the same time, I felt a surge of anger, knowing that Susan was harsh towards Sarah even in front of her young children. Nancy stood beside Tanner and Taylor, all with determined looks, stating, "We don't want to live with such people," echoing Tanner's sentiments. Taylor and Nancy showed agreement. Following Tanner, I spoke up, "I cannot hand over these precious children to you." I stated my position clearly, yet despite our insistence, Susan and Isaac kept pushing to live together with the triplets. Their desperation was evident, likely because their situation wasn't going as planned. Their physical strength seemed to be waning, probably affecting their daily lives. I could empathize with Susan and Isaac's feelings to some extent, as I too have felt the effects of aging, and I knew how significant the support of these children can be during tough times. But the idea of exploiting my precious children for convenience was intolerable. The triplets had been calm during our discussions, but eventually, they showed their anger. When our parents died, you wanted to send us away to an institution because we were too much trouble. They vaguely remembered. That they remembered such a thing pained my heart. Despite their denials, Taylor countered with a reminder of their own words. "I'll return those exact words to you now. Please leave if you can't handle it. Perhaps you should go to an institution." Following Taylor, Tanner repeated those words. Nancy, showing a strong resolve, also stared down Susan and Isaac. These children, once dismissed as a nuisance 17 years ago, were now returning those words to Susan and Isaac as accomplished adults. Their words made me feel the significance of how Harold and I had raised the triplets together. While I felt a sense of clarity, Susan and Isaac's frustration only deepened. It was thought that Tanner and Taylor's words would finally make them give up. But against expectations, Susan and Isaac only showed irritation without any signs of remorse. "Spencer was supposed to take care of us. Now that he's gone, it's only natural you should do it right. Yeah. And if you can't do that, then give us a monthly allowance. Have you forgotten all the care we provided when you were little?" Far from showing any regret, they made even more unreasonable demands. They even demanded payment for the care they had supposedly provided up to that point. I was truly at a loss for words. The lack of compassion from Susan and Isaac was shocking beyond anything I had anticipated. Frozen in shock, the triplets exchanged looks inside. Tanner, who had become a police officer, was the first to speak. "If you make any more trouble, I'll call the police. As an officer, I can assure a prompt response." Tanner, now a police officer, warned sternly. Nancy, now a lawyer, spoke next, asserting, If you threaten our beloved family like this again, we will take legal action." Susan and Isaac's faces paled by the second. Taylor, who worked at the city hall, delivered the final blow. "Also, you're behind on your property taxes, aren't you? Seizure proceedings are likely to start soon. Perhaps you have other matters to attend to." Hearing those words, Susan and Isaac exchanged looks, seemingly realizing they had hit a nerve. They left our home with their heads bowed, their earlier momentum gone. I watched the backs of these three who have become so dependable despite the hardships and the absence of their parents. They'd grown into such caring and wonderful adults, moved to tears by their growth. The triplets comforted me with a gentle hand. After that day, Susan and Isaac never stormed our house again, though they continued to cause trouble at their workplaces, leading to repeated police reports. I had thought they had given up after such a heated discussion. Their persistence left me wondering what to do. Time passed, and then Tanner brought news. Susan and Isaac had been arrested. Isaac reportedly attacked a police officer at Tanner's police station when they were about to be reported again. This constituted a serious obstruction of justice, including their past nuisances. Both were arrested. Relieved by this news, I once again thanked the triplets. "Thank you for growing up so admirably. No matter how many times I say it, it never feels enough. It's us who should be thanking you. We're really grateful. Thank you for being there during the hard times. We've grown this much because of you too." They expressed their gratitude to me and Harold. Seeing Sarah's gentle image overlaid on the triplets, I felt profoundly moved. Even months after Susan and Isaac's arrest, the triplets continue to live happily with us, each now with someone special. As they reach the age of considering marriage, the question of who will stay with Harold and me has become a playful contention, ensuring our family enjoys peaceful